Jumping back into our project, let's start by working to build out our product update form. And what I want to do is I want to actually be able to update the picture associated with this product. So to do that, I'm going to go to my toolbox and I'm going to go under Common Controls. And then what I'm looking for is the link label. I'm going to go ahead and place that link label right here underneath the picture box. And I'm going to set it to have a text value of update or upload picture, or maybe we'll say something like change picture. And this will be a link for change picture, and we'll center that just to make it look nice. And so the idea here is that if I want to change the picture on this product, I would click the change picture link, and then I would want to have a dialog box open to be able to actually select the new picture that I want to use. So I'm going to jump back into my toolbox, and instead of looking at common controls, I'm going to look under dialogues, and under here we'll be able to find things like an open file dialog and a save file. So I'm going to double click on the open file dialog, and what happens is that dialog control doesn't show up on the form itself but becomes a reference down here in my palette. So I now have an open file dialog 1 control that's associated with my form. So from here I can utilize these to go ahead and actually wire up the opening of a dialog box. So I'm going to do a click event on the change picture, so I'm going to double click on this label, and that's going to give me a link clicked event handler. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a var dialog result, and because we're using a dialog, I'm going to get a dialog result back, and then I'm going to select my open file dialog 1 dot show dialog, and that will open up the dialog box to actually show our dialog box to be able to select a file. So I'm going to go ahead and hit start, and let's see how that works. Alright, so I'll go to products, search, B for ball, and we'll go ahead and choose the basketball. So double click on that, and then I'm going to click on this change picture. So clicking on that brings up an open file dialog, and I can browse through my operating system and look for all my pictures and everything and actually find files that I would want to upload. So from there we now have that functionality, but nothing's really happening because all we're doing is opening the dialog and closing it. So in the next piece that will the next piece that we'll need to do is we need to actually capture what's coming from this dialog. So let's add a couple of variables here, or actually let's kind of outline our steps. So we'll start by showing the dialog, and then we want to capture the file selected. And before that, we'll want to verify that a file was selected, capture the file selected, and then I'm just going to say do work to replace picture. So we probably won't cover all of this in this particular video, but let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so we show our dialog box, and with the dialog we can say open file dialog, and there's a filter option, and what that filter does is allows us to identify what kinds of files that we want to be able to open. So what we can do here is I'm actually going to click on filters. I'm going to hit F1 on my keyboard, and what that'll do is it's going to launch out to MSDN, the Microsoft Developers Network, and it's going to pull up the documentation for the file dialog filter property. And the reason I want to do that is I want to be able to see what kinds of examples they have available for me to be able to do my filtering. So this image files example looks like a good one. And what they're doing here is they have a text that appears that says image files, and then in parentheses it has star.bmp, semicolon, star.jpg, semicolon, star.gif, close parentheses. And then there's a pipe. And the pipe breaks between the description of the filter and the actual filter pattern. So if you're familiar with using DOS or PowerShell, or even in Linux, and doing star-based searches or extension-based searches, you should be fairly familiar with these concepts. So what we have here is star.bmp, star.jpg, and star.gif as the actual file types that are limited by doing this filter option. And then the secondary option is all files, which is star.star. So we can write our own and we can customize this however we wanted, but this is actually pretty sufficient for the example, so I'm going to copy that. And then I'm going to set this filter equal to this as a string. So now we need to verify that a file is selected. So the reason why we're capturing this dialog result is because we can do an if statement against it and say dialog result dot, or dialog result equals, and now we can see here that dialog result itself is an enum value, which is similar to a class, but it's more restricted in that it really is just a list of properties that have concrete values associated with them. So we can see here that abort is an option that equals 3, cancel is an option that equals 2, there's ignore, no, none, okay, retry, and yes. So we have a lot of different choices here, and depending on the type of dialog that we have, that would be what you would get back. So I'm going to go ahead and choose OK. So if OK is selected, then we'll want to perform our capture of the file selected. And that was just really just the capture of the path itself. So to do that, we'll need a variable up here, string file path. And then we'll say file path equals open file dialog1 dot file name. And we'll notice here that there's actually file names, plural. So there is a potential, depending on how you configure the dialog, that you could select multiple files. And there's also save file names. And this gets the file name and extension from the box. And this does not include the path. So for us, what we're wanting is we want to actually have the full path to the file. Something else that would probably be useful is that there is an option here where the open file dialog can check that files exist. And this ensures that before we get back that the file that we're selecting is at least existent and that's just not being arbitrarily typed. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to true, but we need to do that before we open the dialog. So we'll need to do that up here. Alright, so at this point we now have a good bit of our functionality in place, and then just until we actually get to our do work part of actually replacing the file, I'm just going to do a message box dot show, and I'm going to show the file path for the file that was selected. Alright, and this is wanting it to be defined, so we'll define this as string.empty for now. And that'll be the default setting, and then once we get a path, then we'll do that, and then we'll have to probably do some sort of an else case scenario to say no file selected. And then we'll probably just want to return out of this as well, so that way we don't end up getting stuck or trying to load a file that still isn't defined. So let's go ahead and start and see what happens. Alright, so we'll go back to products and search, and we'll put B for ball again, and double click on the basketball, and click the change picture, and then we'll jump into here and see, do I have any pictures? We can use this picture of my son. So we'll select that, and then it pops up here and gives us the actual path to the file. So there's the path to the file that we're looking for. We would now have that stored in a variable, and that would then allow us to do our next step of actually reading this file as a stream from the disk and then loading it into our database.